So you were just telling me that you just spent time with your partner in Australia
Mm.
for a while. When did you get? Remind me when you got back.
That was the most recent time I got back from Australia was this just at the start of the new year. I went
Okay.
just before Christmas last year, and then this time I've just been over to Hong Kong and Japan, and just got back
Okay.
2 weeks ago.
Gotcha. So yeah, that was your most recent trip, and you were just talking about how there was a lot of family events and
Yes,
family
absolutely.
gatherings.
Hmm.
How for you do you find it with two different cultures, two different families? How's that going? Because I know my families are hard enough, and we're all of a similar culture, and we're one family super conservative, one family super liberal, and that's really challenging in and of itself.
Sure, I can imagine so. I mean, I'd like to hear. I imagine that is perhaps more of an interesting mix than mine. You may think it's a huge difference, but I don't know.
Yeah,
There are ups and downs to it, and I find that the longer you spend time in that mix, the fewer downs and the more ups there generally are. It's initially can be a bit of a shock to the system. A lot of things seem on the surface to be vastly different, and there are
yeah,
fundamental differences in the way that, in my particular case, like a Hong Kong family and a family from the UK might approach the concept of family and the concept of relationship bonds and how
yeah,
they kind of work. It's way more hierarchical there in with like the Hong Kong culture, and there are a lot more culturally defined kind of do's and don'ts. Uh, with I don't know about with your sort of experience with this, but in our culture, in our family culture, families are generally left to take care of themselves in terms of how you approach any given situation. Our family celebrations look like this, and our family gatherings look like this.
sure,
In Hong Kong, that's already been decided. Culturally, that has been decided, and so you don't get so many choices there. And but that is just an accepted kind of part of that culture. And once you um, experience all of those things, you find that within all that there is every kind of familial what's the word, like touchstone, like cultural touchstone, they're all there.
sure,
Mom's always trying to overfeed everybody. Dad's always kind of in the background giggling while he stuffs his face with what's left.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
it's the same kind of dynamics, just within a slightly different framework.
sure,
And once you understand where your kind of boundaries are within each one, it becomes just as interesting and familial and warm as anything else. And by this point, I love going back and kind of feel
yeah,
part of the furniture. And yeah, it's fun. It sort of works both ways that way as well. It's helped my partner kind of see another side of what family life can be, and it's been fascinating for her as well. So
sure.
yeah, so really interesting to navigate.
When did you decide you wanted to go to Hong Kong? I know we've talked about you living abroad several times.
Mm,
How old were you when you decided that you wanted to go there?
gosh. I suppose the first ever time I had a desire to go there would have been very young, when my father used to show me on a Sunday morning all of the kind of the things he'd recorded the night before on TV, which were things like James Bond movies or Indiana Jones movies, things that I wasn't quite old enough to watch yet, but he and I would sneakily watch them on Sunday mornings while everyone else was in bed. The
What?
ones that always got me were the Hong Kong cinema. Bruce
Mhm.
Lee and Jackie Chan in their sort of prime. He'd managed to record them from
So
late night
good,
TV. Yeah, and this
so
was
good.
for me as a kid in a working class mining town in the UK. So so different. And Indiana Jones and that sort of movie played a huge part. The Goonies and those adventure movies and things growing up, which
Yeah,
anytime I saw a map on a screen with the red dots going across it, I'm like, that's what I want to do. Um, and then so I knew I wanted to kind of travel in general, but it was seeing the locations of those Hong Kong kind of cinema kind of classics, that defined for me where I wanted to travel. That seemed so
Yeah.
other and so different to what I saw around me every day. So that was when the desire formed, but then the means to do so didn't reach me until I was 29 years old. And I spent my 30th birthday just over in China, actually, initially. And so that was when it really came to fruition. So there was a long kind of gap in between that of the formative years and trying to figure a lot of stuff
Yeah.
out before I was like, you know what, I'm gonna do it. And
Gonna
so,
make it happen.
yeah, it was a long
It's
time of waiting.
I think it's interesting how like an idea can germinate in your mind when you're younger, and then it just kind of can eat away at you until you make it, like you find a way to make it happen. At least that's, something I've experienced. And
Mm,
I think it's interesting how the brain just kind of gnaws away at you until you get a chance to do the thing. Like you're either driven to do it, or I think that the opposite. People either driven to do the thing they want to do, or they become consumed by the
mm.
failure of being unable to go that direction, and it can eat away at them. And
Definitely, you're right. And I think given the amount of time between that initial desire forming and me making it happen, I think I experienced both of those things.
yeah,
Because for one reason or another, I didn't then follow that drive and push myself through to do it in my teens, like a lot of people might do in the late teens, early 20s, go, well,
mm-hmm.
this is the time to experiment and to try new things. And I was off doing other stuff at that kind of point and building a lot of what became my character in the end. But it's funny that it was actually almost reaching the point where I was being consumed by the inability to do it that was finally the Kickstarter. That was the thing that pushed me into actually doing it. I had to kind of get to a pretty low point before going, there's got to be something else out there for me, and then just
Yeah,
going, do you know what, if I'm going to give something like this a go, it's been in the back of my mind the whole time, and it has essentially been pushed back by a variety of societal kind of pressures that are put on you. You've got to go and get the job, get the car, get the house, get the relationship, and all this stuff.
be
And
stable,
that gets,
have
yeah.
a stable life.
So yes, you've got that desire, you've got those things that you want to do, and the things that as you said, kind of push you to do these things. But that's counterbalanced often by what you are then told by almost everybody else around you, directly and indirectly. You are told every day that there is a certain standard that you are supposed to achieve to be considered successful and of value to
Sure.
society, and
Yeah,
that can sometimes be pushing in opposition to what you know or think you should be kind of driving towards. And so
absolutely.
that was that in the intervening time was a lot of that kind of struggle and wrestling that away. And it wasn't until I was able to go, do you know what, right now I don't much care what I'm told, because I've given that a go and it's not for me. Like, so what I'm told is success doesn't work for me. Let's give this a shot before it's too late. And that's where I found myself.
For you, 'cause for me, I experienced similar things when I was in my 20s,
Mm,
and I think that a lot of that was due to the influence my parents had on me in terms of, I mean, I had a very comfortable childhood. I can't, it's not like I have some sob story where I can say, oh, I was, and what was me. I mean, I had a very comfortable, well cared for childhood, but
mm,
there was a fear of risk that I had, or that my parents had, and that I ended up having for a
mm,
long time. And it was really hard to overcome that because
yeah.
it's just something that was baked into me from a very young age. I don't know for you, where do you think that came from? That I know that you said that there's these societal pressures. Was that from your family? Was that from just kind of your own perspective on what you thought you were supposed to do? Is there some other force in your life that influenced you outside of that, or was it,
Mm.
something that just kind of organically came about?
That's interesting. It because it sounds. I saw a lot of like I resonated when you said your childhood was not by any means, particularly difficult or unstable, but there was a slightly kind of risk averse sensibility in there. And I think that rings quite true in that certainly my family have been nothing but a support in everything I've done. They, right from an early age, They have allowed my imagination to flourish and sometimes gently pushed me to areas where I didn't feel comfortable and found great value. Um, I mean, their thing was only ever to say, as long as you're doing something, do something. Like, don't do nothing. Do something and do it well.
Yeah.
And that is
Have a
what we would.
purpose.
Yes, have a purpose. Have something that you're doing. Whether it's making something, building something, do something, and we will be happy and support whatever that thing is you're doing. They provided a very open template to my belief systems kind of growing up. As a kind of not particularly religious family themselves, they simply said to me, go out and have a look and see what works or resonates, if anything, and then choose that. And I did just that, and kind of have not really kind of grown up with any particular um, religious attachment my life, but with a respect for all kind of belief systems, and that then extends to in these modern kind of times. It's I believe that's one of the factors that open my mind to many new kind of concepts, and I think that's quite important these days to be able to be very flexible with those things. So very grateful to my family for kind of that, providing me with that attitude. So whilst they were definitely open, there was, as you kind of mentioned, this sort of thing of just be careful, be safe, just do, like, even if doing something means taking kind of a non-ideal option for now. um
Yeah.
there was always that, and you know, we're from a relatively humble people, a humble sort of background, where doing something isn't always like it's. I'm not from a land of dreams. I'm not from just instinctively that, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But I'm not from a land where everyone around you is kind of off doing
Sure.
this or that, you know, rocket science or
Practicality to
yeah,
life.
exactly. There's a very grounded kind of nature of who we are where I sort of grew up, and that's drilled into us all, and that's where that
Yeah.
security and safety blanket sort of comes in. You are not for that kind of life, that other life. Just do the stuff you've got to do, and you'll be all right.
Sure.
Um, so
That
yeah,
other stuff is for the dreamers. You need to stick
yes,
to what you're supposed to do.
yes, and as a very grounded kind of people in general, the head in the clouds attitude wasn't something that was much tolerated, you know, in community where I grew up. So that's, I think, where a lot of the sort of hesitation to act on stuff kind of
Yeah.
comes from.
Yeah.
Um, you know, that when you see those consequences play out live of what happens when, you know, someone tries and fails, it can, the more you see that, certainly when you're young, the more you're instinctively going, well, I don't do that then. The
Yeah.
consequences are too severe,
Oh,
of
sure.
what people will think or what will happen to your finances or whatever it might be. So I won't try that. I won't try that thing.
It's so interesting how that it resonates very much with me because that fear I think is really present for a lot of people of, well,
Mm,
what could happen? What could be the bad things that could happen?
mm,
And I think it's Mike Tyson, the fighter. I
mm.
think one he's an interesting guy. One thing he said is like, yeah, so I think that there's all these things I'm afraid of. I just go do them, and then I'm not afraid of them anymore. And
Yeah.
I, I've been thinking a lot about that. And there's things that I didn't do when I was younger,
Mm,
and we're not talking about any like I'm not talking about like skydiving or free fall, or free climbing on the face of a rock, but just getting used to camping and going on outdoors
yeah.
experiences with your family. So I'm
Yeah.
I'm in this new place where anything that of that nature I was told was not a good idea. I'm now in a position where I just say yes. So well, yes, we have to go do that because
Mhm.
I'm trying to set a better example for my daughter, and I'm trying to learn different things and get outside that mindset.
Yeah.
And I think I've had some practice doing that in business, but I think that benefits one's life a lot when it carries over into other things, into other areas.
Absolutely. I think for me, one of the fundaments of like of making your own success is those transferable skills. Like taking the specializing is great, and we need specialists. That's not me. I'm absolutely a low level bard when it comes to where my skill sets sort of fit. It's jack of all, master of none. And we definitely need specialists to push the envelope and push things forward.
Sure.
But I think it's really important to have adaptable people with skill sets that can transfer across multiple different industries. I mean, if it wasn't for that, I would not have a career. That my
Yeah.
current kind of drive is based on putting all of those different things together and being able to walk into different situations that perhaps you're not familiar with, not used to, and just at least be able to um, hold it together while you're in that situation, even if it turns out to be something that's not for you. Just to be able to go there, approach something, give it a shot, and then walk away from it is powerful.
Yeah.
But it's hard. It's really, really hard as a
Yeah, it
natural
is.
introvert as well. The
Sure.
amount of, I mean, one of the things I mentioned earlier was that every so often my family had gently kind of encouraged me into something that I thought wasn't for me. And the first example of that was attending a drama school, a drama club, when I was about, I guess, 11 or 12 years old. I would always been had a great imagination, but been incredibly introverted. I'd spend summer holidays happily by myself in the garden, reading or playing in the garden with figures, toy soldiers, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
That would be me. I'd be good to go. Um, but in order to try and allow me to share that, my folks sent me to this drama club, and the after being very reticent at first, the first night was like an improv night to kind of warm up. And it was the first ever time in my life that I was in a circle of peers, people both slightly younger and a fair bit older than me, like bigger kids, teenagers and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
People who looked pretty cool and pretty confident actually. And
Got it together.
it was the first ever time that I had not been mocked or ridiculed by peers for having this slightly off-center imagination. Not that I was bullied a lot or anything at school, but I was always slightly on the fringe, and kind of happy with that. But all of a sudden, there was a circle of these peers that were all like, "That's quite funny," or "That's really cool what you said there," and I found myself stood in the middle of this improv kind of circle for 24 minutes, just riffing with this one person, and
Yeah.
it was really, really cool. And so that began this years long interest in doing musical theatre. I ended up becoming a dancer as part of this as well, so that I didn't look so bad in the musical theatre show. I could sing and act
Interesting. I didn't know that about
relatively.
you.
Yeah, well, we have you seen the movie Billy Elliot?
Yeah. 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 I've seen
Okay,
that.
it was we were sort of our town's version of that Billy Elliot boys dancing thing. There wasn't really a boys dancing group, and there were several boys between the ages of like 12 and 16 that were doing these musical theatre shows, and we could all hold a tune and kind of perform. We were kind of clowns in that kind of regard, but none of us could dance. And
Yeah.
so when the dance routines came up, the girls in the school, in the club, were all from the local dancing school. So they were all really good. And we were terrible. So we thought, well, we can't be having this. We need to do something about it. So we asked if we could form this class.
Yeah.
And we formed the class, and we used to do the dancing display every year. We did like ballet, modern, jazz, tap, a few little bits of everything. Um, and funnily enough, that kind of transitioned later into kind of martial arts for me in terms of transferable skill sets.
So
Um,
was that a direct thing where after you learned how to dance, you went over and started training martial arts? Because for me, it went the other way. I
mm,
learned how to box, and then all of a
mm,
sudden, I realized I could use some of those boxing footwork steps. I used to go to clubs by myself because that
mm,
was going to the dance clubs was my way of trying to meet some of the ladies when I was younger,
right,
and
right.
so I really liked dancing, and I thought that was a thing that I was good at, and I could
Hmm.
strike up a conversation that way. And I didn't like to drink very heavily, so a lot of my friends would go out and they would want to drink really heavily when we went out, whereas that
Mm,
wasn't something I was interested in. So
yeah.
I eventually got in the habit of I would just go to the clubs by myself, and if anybody asked, "Oh, hey, where's your buddy?" They go, "Ah, they're over there by the bar. They're getting a drink." Um, and so I was able to use some of the boxing footwork there on
Mm.
the dance floor, and I was able to survive at least for a while.
Dude, it's legit. Like the two really do transfer over quite well, and
Yeah,
more and more people in sports I hear that are doing various kinds of dance or rhythm based kind of exercise in order to help with, like, I know for soccer or football players, they will find that kind of footwork very useful too. Um, for me, it wasn't necessarily a direct change. What happened is I got at the age of 16, I got a Saturday job, and that was when we would dance. So I had to stop dancing
Okay.
because of this. And then I went to college and did all of this kind of stuff. So I that's when drama kind of stopped. But in my sort of later teens, 17, 18, I had always had an interest in martial arts through the movies, but I'd never done it. I'd always been too scared to walk through. There was a karate club right around the corner from me, and Karate Kid was one of my films growing up, and I always wanted to walk in, but I was always
Great
too
movie.
scared. I
Sure.
tried every other sport as a kid because I was like, I'll give this a go. I played badminton and ran and did track and field and all of this stuff. That was the one I always wanted to do, but I was always too scared to do it.
Afraid to go.
Yep. I was just scared that bigger kids would hurt me, or I'd lose and be laughed at or whatever. I didn't know. And I didn't know for a long, long time. And so
Yeah.
yeah, when I was 18, I was like, okay, I'm gonna give this a go. And I took up Aikido, the art of the samurai sword. That was my first martial art.
That's
Um,
badass.
it was really, really cool. And I had to travel pretty far to go there, but I was doing it on my own steam with money I'd earned because I was working from pretty young. Um, and that sort of ignited uh, that fire in me to kind of keep pursuing something like this. And dance really helped with it. I didn't know it at the time, but it helped me with forms, routines, like things that you have to kind of repeat and practice because that's exactly how dance works. But that drama school was really the first example of many different examples of transferable skills. It gave me the ability, without knowing it, to interact with and talk to people both much, much younger than me and much older than me, from very different backgrounds. And it taught me to interact with, it gave me something really valuable, which was a non male dominated environment to interact with and thrive within. That was super valuable, because many of my male peers growing up did not have that. It was the rugby club or the soccer club, and it
Mm-hmm.
was really male dominated. And so
Mm-hmm.
there was only one outlet for your personality. And if you couldn't do that or didn't do
Mm-hmm.
it right, then it was not great. So, there were lots of different things that I didn't know at the
Trial of
time.
youthful masculinity.
100%,
Yeah.
100%, and that's big where I come from as well, because again, a working class
Sure. Oh yeah.
uh, kind of background, like an old mining town. So that was really big there. So for me, that was great because it allowed for a fully rounded version of myself to start being shared with people, and it turned me into a practiced extrovert, so not a natural extrovert, but I was able to then thrive in that, and that went forward and helped later in the various work that I do and have continued to do. So all of those things, they all transfer in you. It's all about taking those little parts of it and looking at where you can apply them. When people talk about making a CV and they're like, oh yeah, just put that thing in your CV, it will look great. Don't just put it in there because it will look great. Seriously take a look at the stuff you've done, even if you don't think it's
Sure.
relevant, even if it's completely left field as to the career you're going for now, or the channel you're going down, because you will find that stuff is there. And it's such a big lesson for me that to take those little bits from each of those moments of your life and understand how to apply them in whatever it is you're
Definitely.
doing. Mm,
Definitely. That's the You and I are both in education
mm,
and different ways, involved in professional education. And that was something that when I started the RPG club, when I started running D&D games professionally, that's when I looked at I think you and I have talked about this before. I looked at the modules and I just said, well, this is just a lesson plan. All this is a lesson plan, and running a D&D game is teaching.
yeah.
It's just facilitating a group. Um,
Hmm.
and I didn't realize that until it just came to me one day where I was just like, this is just a textbook and we just can do this in a
Yeah.
different way. And um, it's really nice when you have those moments in life where something dawns on you that you knew something all along. It was right
Yes.
there and you just didn't really realize it until usually my wife tells me a lot of those moments.
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes we need other people to point it out for us. But when those moments come, they're powerful, they're strong, and they
Yeah.
stick with you. They become
Yeah.
like that fundament of what you are and how you work and how you can generally operate. So Very, very valuable stuff to take
Yeah,
forward.
yeah. So do you still practice martial arts?
Not hard, not as hard as I did when I was living in China and doing it full time. I'm not capable of that anymore. But again, what I took from kind of that time, the more intensive kind of times of training,
Yeah.
um, are certain practices and mindsets. I'll still practice something known as qigong, which is like a
Oh, I've heard of
breathing
that.
exercise.
Yeah, yeah, I've heard of that.
Yeah, somewhere between Tai Chi and I oop, hesitate to say yoga. It, it it's a movement art. It's not
Uh,
designed for combat or
yeah,
anything
it's an
like
it's
that.
an energy focus of
Mm,
trying to figure out where your center is, and then
yeah,
I had a
absolutely.
friend who was, I was, I think, early 20s, where I was still,
Mm,
I wasn't, you know, my parents' little kid anymore, but I was still trying to figure out what I was all about. And he was
mm,
probably 5 or 6 years older than me, and he was like really into psychedelic drugs, and I was not,
mm.
but I thought he was cool because he was. But he was also into the Eastern arts, and he was a
Mm.
trained botanist. So his
Oh,
whole
right.
thing was he always was playing with substances at his house and was like, "Look at this new little plant that
Wow.
I grew. This is so cool." And I was trying to appreciate it for what it was. I think at the time I was more interested in just figuring out like how I could get high without screwing myself up. But
Yep.
he was the one who got me into. We met through boxing, and then he was like, "Hey,
Oh.
why don't we?" So we met at a gym and we became sparring partners. Even though he was much smaller than me, he was way more skilled. So he was like, I'll work with you until you're good enough to hurt me, and then we have to,
Yep.
because you're so much
Switch over.
bigger, and then we have to kind of end that part of our friendship and do other things. And so eventually we
Mm,
started just talking about, the mind and how the mind can grow and can get in touch with energy sources. So that's he told me about different Eastern techniques to focus
mm.
the energy, and it can really help when you're trying something different instead of just
Yeah.
focusing on what you haven't heard of before, to think about something in a new way.
Yeah,
Um,
it is. I mean, and there's a bunch of different ways to look at it as well. This word energy gets thrown around a lot when talking about stuff like that, and I have a pretty specific relationship with all of that thing. Like as someone who's naturally not particularly spiritual, I tend to come at things from a sort of practical angle. Despite my incredible imagination that I've always had since I was a child, that's very much a
yeah,
separate thing for me. There's a kind of divide, and whilst the imagination lives daily all around you, I've never been quite so convinced about spiritual kind of matters. So
sure,
when I sort of think about and talk about uh, energy and the movement of energy when it comes to qigong, for me, that's a very practical matter. So for me, I'm thinking about it more in terms of how I'm breathing, how I'm oxygenating the
hmm
blood around kind of my body, and using tensing, untensing, and understanding my internal mechanisms as well as I do my external mechanisms. Through Qigong, I've been able to very much get in tune with what's going on inside as well. And I've needed that over the years. That's how I've managed to overcome panic attacks and anxiety, things like
really,
this, because I had to learn the difference between, during the height of my panic attacks, what's a heart attack and what's just trapped wind. It sounds really stupid, but during the height of an anxiety attack, that is the line is very blurred because you convince yourself a certain thing's happening. Um, Through qigong, I'm able to understand my body in a way that I'm like, right, I know what's going on here, and I understand that this pain is from muscle or from bone or from
sure,
this or from that. And then oxygenating the blood, as I say, just like breathing in a way that kind of makes sure you're getting good oxygen to all of your extremities and things.
yeah.
That's kind of where I look at this energy transfer. Um, I haven't shut the door on these other higher concepts. I just don't fully kind of understand them enough and process them well enough to kind of get into all that.
I understand what you're saying. It's the
Mm,
the way your mind views the world works for where you are, and
yeah.
I think anybody who takes time to think about it is whatever conclusion they land on. I think that the fact that you've taken time to think about it is really positive, and I think that not enough people take time to process truly what it is they think about,
Mm,
how the way all of this works outside
mm,
of ourselves, whether it's nature, whether it's God, whether it's mystical forces in the universe. I think it you know I've spent a lot of time recently reflecting on that, reading lots of philosophy and trying to educate myself more thoroughly because I thought I knew what I knew and I was convinced I knew what I knew. And then I convinced myself maybe I don't know exactly what I know. And so I spent a lot of time
That's
um,
good. I
digging
think it's
through that.
yeah. I think
We've
it's
got a
really
one
really special to know
Linka,
what
one
you
of
don't
our
know. Ooh,
I don't mean to interrupt that. Linka,
no,
one of
go.
our community members, had a question here.
Mm.
In your CV, would you ever find fun ways of wording professional, legit DM in ways that you didn't have to explain? So I don't know. What do you think about that? What's your take on that? How would you phrase that? Because I know you run games for RPG Club professionally.
Hmm.
How would you phrase those vast skill sets for those looking to take a look at it?
Well, first of all, I would be in terms of like if I was looking at a CV specifically, right? What I would look to do is start up with straight honesty in terms of the job title.
Yeah,
Don't mess around with job titles. It is what it is. That you're a professional, you could say game master if that kind of suits better, or D&D organizer or something like this. But be pretty straightforward with what that is. And then after that, it really depends what you're going for. Every CV in my experience should be tailored to the kind of specific job you're going for, or the specific industry that you're going for, and that's where you then choose your pick and choose the relevant points underneath the description of like the title of the job. What were the things you did within that job that
sure.
you can bring into this job? So look, let's say you want to become a drama teacher. My sister's a drama teacher, right? And so if you want to apply for that particular job,
Yeah,
you would straight away be able to say that you have very good improvisational skills, you have a good grasp on popular culture, and you've generally, as a DM, probably drawn on a lot of performative, creative writing in the past as well. There are various kind of performative aspects of this that can really help the structure of it. As you mentioned before, the structure of a lesson plan and the structure of a game night plan aren't all that dissimilar.
there's
So
a lot of overlap.
yeah, there's a lot of overlap there. Now, if you're going for a job in finance, you maybe don't need to focus too much on that kind of stuff. Maybe this is more of a footnote job, but it's
Sure.
not to say that you cannot bring some of that into play, because what you have done as a professional dungeon master is you have um, pre kind of written and organized a structured meeting for 3 hours. You have helmed that meeting for 3 hours. You have controlled a variety of different personalities under that meeting. You've done so in the guise of whatever, a different kind of uh, a different maybe personality to what you normally are.
Yeah.
So it shows that you're an adaptable person that can work with people from different backgrounds, different organizations, and bring them together and unify them on one solid idea, even if that idea is made up. I mean, hell, that's exactly what advertising people are looking for every single day. You want to get a job in advertising? Bring all that stuff in. Okay, so that
Absolutely.
like it really depends. Like that the you adapt it for what your kind of current purposes are. This is what I mean about bringing forward those transferable skills. Like being able to be a self-recognized chameleon is really important.
And people are good at so many different things. And I
Mm,
think a lot of folks I meet don't realize what they're good at
yeah.
until maybe they have someone to reflect upon with that and illuminate that in a sense of, no, this is a skill. This is something you can really highlight for others.
Yes.
And that's what I appreciate about so many of the people I meet through RPG Club with the GMs, with the players, is people are good at a lot of different
Mm,
ideas. And it's like they can share that with each other at the role playing table because it's, as you said, it's under the guise of this different thing. It's like,
yeah.
oh, we're just playing, we're telling a story, we're just it's just playtime. But really, there's a lot going on, and I find that the subtext for a lot of it is people want to have really good social connections with people while also
Yeah.
getting something out, whatever that is, whether it's a story they have in their head or whether it's they want to work on building their confidence or their creative writing. But all of those things are furthered when you have a good social connection with everybody. And then once that trust is built amongst the players, the game to me becomes about something it's not about how many orcs are we going to kill. It becomes about
Yes.
how are we all playing this game together? How are we all growing together?
Mm,
And it's I feel like it's just now becoming something that's noticed
yeah.
in society. I used to have to really sell the idea of professional game masters. I would get in conflicts with people. One person threatened to call the police on me because I was charging to run a role playing game. And so we're going to call the police. This is illegal. I said, "What are you talking about?" I'm just, And so we had an argument about that. But I don't find there's that resistance as much anymore because I think
No.
popular culture is starting to see that um, there's more to it than just free playtime, and just make believe. There's a lot going on.
There's there's massive value in that. I think there's a few things that have turned around in the past kind of few years with all the major transitions we've done as a species, I think. And people are starting to look at and value the idea of play, creativity, imagination a lot more. I would always ask people, anyone that would doubt the value inherent in running D&D games, either professionally or otherwise, I would ask them to look all the way back to kind of ancient Greece and the traveling storytellers of their kind of
Yeah,
time. There, it was a profession back then. That was a way of life and a profession. You would travel the world doing things because other people were not able to travel the world doing things. Now, the world was a much smaller place for them back then, the Mediterranean kind of area, but it was completely unknown. And so going around doing things had a great value to it in the past because everybody else was busy farming, fighting, surviving, governing, whatever it might be,
busy not dying.
busy not dying. And that's a point that I'd really like to come back to as well.
Sure.
That these storytellers, these traveling storytellers, first of all, had to be capable enough to survive the travels that they went on, and secondly, had to be compelling enough and interesting enough to make people to draw an audience, to make people want to come and listen to them and pay them for their service, whether it be in lodging or food or actual money or whatever it might be. That was the service they could provide to people. They could tell people news. They could tell people kind of different kind of cultural aspects that were forming in wider kind of Greece and the kind of areas around it. This was an incredibly valuable skill, and they sold themselves by then creating these stories, creating these imagination filled tales that what they're asking of people is to share in that collective imagination with them about the Medusa and the maze with the bull-headed man inside that never like that you'll get lost but they never will, and all
Yeah.
these kind of stories that formed from these times were kind of these truth based on myth kind of myth based on truth sort of crossovers, and it was widely accepted and valued back then. I think we may be cycling back around to a time when we're starting to see the value in that for our purposes as modern human beings. Certainly, when it comes to things like, if you want to talk about like the rise of things like AI and things like that, where we're maybe starting to find that some of our most prized skills of the past few generations are now being outsourced to machines and computers and
Sure.
all these kind of things. That's going to be very, very difficult to replicate when it comes to the idea of the imagination, to the idea of the creative or the artist. Many people are
Absolutely.
worried that AI art will replace real art. I'm not that worried because AI art is always going to operate within certain limitations.
It has
I
parameters.
feel, yeah, it has parameters. It must take a human or humanoid mind to push the envelope further, to create something, to see something in their mind's eye that has not been seen. All AI art at the
Yeah.
moment still requires you to program a various, it can be a wild selection of different factors for them to research. But if you have nothing, it can draw on nothing.
Yeah.
Whereas we still have the ability to create. So
It's all
I think those
derivative.
things are the value in that is becoming more important now. We're not
Absolutely.
just we're not just convinced anymore that we must be droning away in a particular kind of mass industry. We can maybe monetize our individuality?
And which I think is great, because I think that the traditional pathways, like we've talked about earlier, um, they're not for everybody. And
No.
I think there's people with a lot of ideas, and the fact that we can now, I mean, I've met so many people that work for the company that have either quit jobs or have made what they do with our players
Mhm.
a large portion of how they make their living.
Yeah.
And I didn't think that was going to happen. I honestly thought when I started the company that we would put good games together because people wanted to play, and then the games would have a natural life cycle and people would come and
Mm.
go, and it was just going to be a way for people to just to play and as time permitted. But
Yeah.
it's really become a calling for certain people in the organization from the GM side. And also, I think for the player side, which I think players really appreciate good GMs because they've
Yeah.
played in many cases with people that do not have the skill sets that you and I have been talking about, or that
Mm.
you've mentioned. And that can be, and I've seen it before, and it can be very problematic when someone doesn't have those skills, that diverse array of facilitation and group management and being empathetic and supportive and directing kind of the flow of where things are going and knowing how to read people.
Mm.
It can go very badly. And it can,
Yeah.
and when I was in the classroom and I would work with kids when they were trying to become GMs, the hardest part is teaching them that they don't get to be the center of attention. The GM
Yep.
tends to want to, especially a young GM tends to want to
Excuse
run,
me.
their story. They want to have something
Mm.
they want to do. And then you have to work with them and say, well, this is not your story. You are the vessel
Yeah.
that allows the story to live. Um,
Sure. Yeah, I mean, just as you were saying, I was thinking you have to do all of that stuff without having the ego, right? Without
sure.
bringing the ego into it. And that's tough. That's very different to, let's say, to bring it back to an earlier example, being a performer, because you need a certain amount of ego to perform. But to be a DM, you need to kind of abandon that out of the gate. You are going to be beaten, you are going to be embarrassed, you're going to have all your fiendish puzzles broken, and you're going to enjoy it. And if you don't, then maybe DMing isn't for you, because it will
For
hurt.
sure.
Otherwise it will
I feel
sting.
like the job is to lose just barely every
Mm,
single time, but make everyone feel
yes.
like you were going to win.
Yeah,
And
just
it
barely.
really is humbling because you do have
Mm,
to, a good GM, I guess this could be another 2 hour conversation if we start getting into that specifically. But I've found my natural tendency as a GM is to not necessarily pull punches, but to
mm.
scale the difficulty level to wherever the players are at. Just
Yeah,
just to
absolutely.
push them right there, because that was my philosophy as a coach when I coached sports.
Mm,
It was to make it just as hard, just push the kids just a little bit beyond where they were, but to not to the point where they would get discouraged. And
yeah.
sometimes I would play too, and I was when I was younger, so I could still actually, I could still run around, and I was playing as middle school kids, so I could I could dominate if I had to. Um, never doubt your ability to intimidate a 13-year-old or 12-year-old kid. Um, but I think that when you can finally take that ego out of things and
Yeah.
put the players at the center of it, that's when you go from being just an amateur to someone who can be a professional. It's really,
Yes. You're right. And yeah, it's funny what you said about that. I mean, I think about the same thing when I was teaching kindergarten kids kung fu. I'm like, I could take these guys, no problem.
go whoop your ass.
But I'm going to let them jump all over me and, and beat me, because it's very cute and funny. But no, like you're very right. Realizing that the game is not your sort of plaything's really key. But you're really right in that that's one of the things that my couple of years living in the kung fu school sort of taught me, was exactly how much it's safe to push anyone in anything, um, in order to help them grow. And you have to just slightly break them. It's like the once I learned about the theory of how muscle development worked, I didn't learn that until I was in my late 20s, in that you have to
Yeah,
tear them a little bit in order for them to grow back stronger. You can't go too far and just pull them apart, because then they're
tear your
useless.
bicep. Yeah,
And doing anything up to tearing them is basically pointless. And so that is a really, really good philosophy for people's minds as well. You know, having that consciousness to sort of know exactly where that point is where you can push someone just to that.
Sure.
And I try and do that with my players. I try and make sure that they are pushed just to that limit where they've had to adapt, they've had to survive, they've had to push, they've had to pick themselves up and go, no, I'm going to do this. I can choose to
Yeah.
keep laying down right now, or I can choose to stand back up and face this. I might be put back down again any moment, but they're my two choices, and I'm choosing the latter. Um, it might sound like nothing when it's your level 2 fighter against a goblin, but if just one person can take that into a real life situation and go, no, I'm not going to sit and take that. There is not an unexpected item in the bagging area. I'm not going to
Yeah.
just stand for this at the
Yeah.
supermarket and like
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
accept
Yeah.
this. I'm going to push
Yeah.
by and just be a little bit of a hero in my tiny day to
Yeah.
day life. That's what we kind of want to try and do, and just push people into growing through that kind of means because it's that much more satisfying.
I like what you say about just be a little bit more of a hero in your everyday life. And
Tiny bit.
it's so hard to do. But
Mm,
when you have those moments, when you have those moments where you can kind of assert yourself a little bit in the right way,
hmm.
it's really satisfying. I was very passive for a long time when I was young.
Yeah.
My dad was a very um, didn't he was not very confident, and he was a very passive person. Although he was large, he was 6'5", but
Mm,
very never stood up for himself. So I've spent my whole adult life learning to stand up for myself.
sure. Yeah, me
And
too.
it's I totally know what you mean by saying, becoming that hero and just being able to say, no, 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 I was overcharged, or
Yeah.
excuse me, no, I was standing here first. You can wait your turn, and
Hmm.
it's amazing how satisfying that can be. I still enjoy that to this day.
It is, and do you know what? If one needs to put it in that context of a little adventure every time in order to get there, then do it because it's that much more exciting. If you need to put like the imaginary kind of evil glowing red-eyed helm on the
Yeah,
over the face of the person that's currently like pushing you that little bit too far, or do you know what I mean? If you need to imagine that in your head to put yourself there, then do so. Every time I'm at the airport, I imagine I'm actually Jason Bourne, and it makes the airport experience the most fun thing you can do. I'm just because I'm often on my own when I'm traveling. So, like for me, I'm just like, this isn't my real identity, and I always go through with this kind of like, I hope they don't discover the ceramic, ceramic kind of stuff in my bag, and I've got to
oh
go to
my
this
god.
market. Like, it just makes it so much fun, and you put those little bits of imagination into your day to day life, and it just the sparks start flying. It starts becoming interesting to be out there again.
When I'm driving, we have two vehicles. We have one vehicle that has an all black interior, and it's
Mm,
got it's a Chevy Equinox, and it's got the shifter right, kind of on the column or on
mm,
the by the seat. So
mm.
I imagine that I'm flying a TIE fighter
There you
on
go.
like routine like transport patrol, and
Yeah,
I'll like talking to the comms, and
yeah.
entertain myself as I do that. And I haven't really told anybody that because it takes a like-minded person to understand it. My wife would just think I'm an idiot, but
But
I
that
enjoy doing that.
that's the thing. I have had those little things my whole life, and I've only really just felt in the past few years like I've been comfortable enough to tell people about those sides of my
Sure.
personality. Because now it's something that is to be embraced. Like now it's something to be valued because it's not just you with your head up in the clouds anymore. Like
Yeah.
it's in some ways it's a coping mechanism. And like I wanted to kind of pull round to something we'd
Yeah.
mentioned
Yeah.
earlier about how the people back in those days were too busy surviving, trying
Sure.
to kind of
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
along. And that puts me in mind of anyone that might be thinking about doing something like we're doing here, or anyone that is looking at, I don't know, changing careers or trying something new. It doesn't really matter kind of where you're sort of from. I've worked in a variety of very low level kind of humble environments and still taken a lot away from those. Even if like what you're doing is you don't think it's particularly glamorous or particularly high status or high skilled, you are just by surviving at a job that you don't like or in an environment you're not comfortable in, just by surviving there, just by picking yourself up every day and
Absolutely.
going out and doing the thing and getting back into bed knowing that you're going to do the thing the next day, that is the skill. That in itself, you are teaching yourself skills. You're teaching yourself about resilience, about mental fortitude, about patience, about the ability to look beyond the immediate future and look at
For
perhaps a
sure.
certain goal in mind or something like this. Everything everyone is doing, as long as you are doing something, to take it back to mum and dad, like what they were always tell me, as long as you're doing something, you're gaining a
Mm,
transferable skill in some way. And so, learn from those survival things, learn, and it's like how you learn from failures, learn from things that didn't go so well. The
yeah,
same thing is to be applied, even if you think you're doing the boring supermarket job or the this or that, which I've been there and done. Like, there are lessons to be learned there. So yeah, take them all.
those those jobs, I think that you're mentioning, the jobs that you're uncomfortable with, that you don't like, or that are,
Mm,
I think those are the ones where you learn the most,
mm,
because you're out of your skill set, you're out of your
yep,
comfort zone. I totally understand that, and that was, and I had a couple of jobs, and I was in between professionally teaching in the classroom and then eventually moving into my own, running my own company, where it was, they were awful. I mean, I was fighting depression, I was fighting anxiety, and it was
yep,
because of the job. But I said I can't quit this because I have to feed my family. I have to, and that was things I didn't know how to do. I was not very good at them. Where I came from the classroom, where I was good. It was easy because I was
yeah,
doing it over and over again, so I knew what to do every day. And then every day was just a shit show of me failing every single day for like a year and a
absolutely,
half. Um, I think had I not gone through that process, I wouldn't have had the confidence to start a business, because I was
no,
just so used to failing at that point where I was like, why don't I just try this? Because the worst that can happen is I'll fail and I'll still be doing this job that I hate, but it's better than
exactly,
not trying. It's
exactly. I mean, I was in the very same place before I moved overseas. I was in exactly that kind of place where I was rock bottom. I wasn't happy with where I was at, and it took that to kind of push me towards, well, what is it I can do? What is it I do like? What is it I'm
yeah,
interested in? And it was, happened to be for me finding a very obscure kung fu school in China and moving there for 2 years. But whilst that's quite an extreme example of it, it doesn't have to be that. It just has to be something else that sort of gets you out of bed in the morning, something else
yeah.
that sort of floats your boat. I'm also aware that there was another comment or question came up. I
Oh,
wanted to make sure
Link had
we.
just mentioned about AI here. I just was putting that up there so everybody could see it on
Mm,
the vids after the fact. So Linka says
awesome.
AI stuff is a big growing problem for my industry. People will always be the best, though human imagination is not replicable. Linka, if
Mm,
you want to share what industry you're in, we'd love to hear that, so we
yeah,
can
absolutely.
talk about that a little bit, because that definitely is impacting a lot of different industries and businesses right now.
For sure.
I do find that I use it sometimes to write or help me write copy or structure copy for my social media.
Mm,
Um, and I feel like a little bit like I'm cheating, because I come from my teaching perspective of, I have to originate all this stuff myself. So I
mm.
always review everything and then I edit it, and I just use it more to help me generate some structure. But
Yeah,
it's a weird space to be in.
it
It's
is
a
a weird
weird
space.
space we're in.
I think the thing I try and do with myself to kind of align myself with it, make sure it's not too terrifying, is to think of it, to think of AI and that sort of thing like the best hammer you've ever had. It is still a tool.
Sure.
If you leave the hammer on the thing, it's not going to go and build a house by itself. And
Correct.
as long as that is true, then AI is not too scary,
And
right? As
Linka
long as,
said,
like, if as long as you think it's a tool and not something to just replace your thinking
yeah,
and to replace
yeah,
your creative, your handiwork,
it just
you know.
makes your brain capable of 1000x, as
Mm.
long as you know how to use it.
Yeah,
I don't know. I'm
exactly.
still trying to figure out how to use it for my work. And Linka says that it's video games that the industry that they're in. So I can imagine that would be a very tense time. Here, let
I
me.
imagine so. Like, I hope that it funnels through into like a tool set, something that helps to
Yeah,
streamline certain parts of the industry
sure,
and make it more possible. Because one of the conversations in that industry at the moment is the appropriate length of time to make games. Some of the biggest and kind of broadest franchises out there, they're going into extremes. They're either taking 5 to 10 plus years to make the next game, which some people don't like, some people prefer, or they're insisting on doing one game every year, and then this crunch thing and all of it. It's a weird kind of space, the video game industry, because it a little bit like the kind of nerd industry, if you want, in the rise of kind of nerdism as a pop culture kind of juggernaut. It's
For sure.
still sort of finding its feet in so many ways, and understanding what certain protocols should be, and how to do this thing. It is an emerging art form, video games, that there isn't necessarily a right or wrong answer to it.
Yeah.
So AI coming in at this point, who knows the long term effect it's going to have? But you
I
know,
I
fingers
I
crossed for it.
hope it has a positive effect, but I also understand
Yeah,
that positive effect can positive for one person can be negative for another, depending on if it's affecting people who are in it on the
absolutely.
backside. Excuse me.
Mm.
Lincoln mentions, I think as teachers, you guys have the most experience in controlling a group of both shy players or chaotic players. What do you
Mhm.
think about that, Mr. Gray?
Well, Mr. Scott, I think that it is one of the industries where you can certainly, I mean, that's a major drawing point. If anyone coming from an educational background will have baked in responses and strategies for dealing with various different groups of shy players, chaotic players, all the rest of it. Absolutely, I think that that's the classroom management draws itself very well into D&D,
Yeah.
but I wouldn't say that it's always the case, because I have experience of teachers who are incredibly rigid in the way that they structure their
Mm-hmm.
lessons and their structures.
Mm-hmm.
And indeed, in education itself and in schooling, one of my biggest criticisms of the education system is its rigidity, and its insistence on controlling certain things that don't need to be controlled. The Scandinavian education system is primo. That stuff's excellent, because it teaches. I mean, another 2-hour podcast talking about that. Their education system is wonderful, but it it really just depends on the teacher. I think, yes, being a teacher can certainly help with that, but you have to kind of balance where you came from on that. The if you
Depends on the approach.
Yeah, depends on the approach, on the person. The best teaching jobs I've ever had have been the ones where they've said, "Well, look, this is the curriculum. We need that in the brain of the students. How it goes from A
Mm-hmm.
to brain is up to you." They're
Yeah.
the kind of best jobs that I've enjoyed. There have been those that don't allow that freedom, and I don't think that
Sure.
promotes particularly positive skills. I think the skill you take away from that job is the patience as a teacher to withstand having to do something that goes against perhaps your principles, um,
Mm-hmm.
in order to just get food on the table and
For sure.
next thing. Yeah.
I understand. I was in the AP teaching world. I don't know if you
Mm,
guys are familiar with the AP program. I don't know
vaguely.
if it's US or it's basically collegiate level courses, university
Mm,
courses, in the junior and senior year of high school, the last 2 years of
okay.
American schooling. And so I taught economics, and many of the kids really enjoyed it, but it was a very
Mm,
rigid. I mean, I had the freedom to teach how we got to the end, but
mm,
there were things that students absolutely had to know. And I had my bosses saying they absolutely have to get this score. They have to know this. And I remember having kids who they weren't there yet.
mm,
They were trying. They did everything that they could. They did everything that I asked. I remember I had several students who would, as we were approaching the time for the test at the end of the year, they would just break down crying. And they would just, and I had a few kids one year that just were like inconsolable. I just said, you're going to do the
yeah.
best you can.
Mm,
I don't think it reflects upon you, but I don't like seeing that. I don't like seeing the specific designed outcome. And that's something that's hard for me as a parent right now, because being someone who was in the schools and now is kind of outside the schools and has a much different view of education than I did 10 years ago.
gosh,
It's hard
yeah.
for me seeing my daughter going into school now with what I know are very prescribed outcomes. And,
Mm,
you know, it's a
it's
big
rough.
challenge. Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
challenge.
it's working in the Asian education system for so long. That's a huge factor there, and it's not. I was going to say it's a problem, but it's not considered a problem there. That's just the way it goes. There, it's
Yeah, it's cultural
incredibly,
model that I think is different
yeah,
in terms of the
incredibly
approach.
results oriented,
Yeah.
and it creates a lot of anxiety. I've seen students that have really been kind of broken by by those pressures, and it's tough. It's sad, and you have to try and distance yourself from it to a certain degree
Yeah.
as an educator in another country and respect the way it's kind of done there. But I would find it hard to put a child of mine through that.
Oh, absolutely.
Send them to Sweden for
Yeah.
their education. They'll come back very very
I've
blinded.
always, the thing that frustrates me the most, and I think I've talked about this with my wife, is that there seems to be so much downtime in schools, in the sense of,
Mm,
I don't think students need to have information crammed into their head. That's not necessarily what I want students to have. But there's just a lot of transition times, and there's lots of kids are at the school, and they're present in the school,
mm,
and sometimes they're wondering, well, what's next, and they don't really have anything that they're doing. They're just kind of there.
yeah.
And I've heard in the Swedish model or the Scandinavian model, I think it's like a 4-hour school day, and it's very loosely structured, and there's a little bit of homework, and then the students get on with the rest of their day.
Mm,
And that's the thing that I would love to see that in the American system. With my daughter's ready to be done with school after several hours. She's like, okay, I want to
yeah.
go look in the backyard for critters. I want to go and run around. I want to learn to ride my bike. I want to go to my athletics practice. Like, she has things she wants to do, and
Hmm.
I feel like a lot of kids are ready to do those things, and sometimes
Yeah,
the system keeps them
absolutely.
in one spot, and it's frustrating.
Absolutely. But again, I mean, whole nother subject on that one. I can
Yeah.
definitely get into
Well,
the ups and downs
I
of the
also know you
education
have to
system.
go here in the near future.
Hmm.
You had a gathering tonight, and I know that
Yes.
I have to get some administrative stuff done, which is always the least favorite part of my job.
Mm.
So we had talked before about, you have some plans for some things you're working on, some projects you're working on.
Yes.
We haven't touched base on those in a while, but I just wanted to see what are you thinking with where those are at, just so people who are watching this after the
Mm.
fact or right now might know kind of what's the next step for Adam Gray.
Well, I mean, it is bringing all of those disparate threads together, to be honest with you, and bringing together experience as an English as a second language teacher and as a dungeon master, and kind of I'm trying to form this sort of um, ESL and D&D kind of group, aimed
Yeah,
towards younger audiences who have English as a second language and wish to kind of improve on kind of pre-existing skills. Certainly, kind of conversational, casual English and that kind of thing, by essentially providing an ESL class that is structured exactly like you would see in an English ESL tech kind of textbook,
yeah,
but framed within the context of a D&D adventure. So instead of like having, I don't know, the directions class, the class on the cardinal
sure.
directions and all these different and over and under and all that, that's kind of a travel segment in a D&D adventure,
That's fantastic.
and they're navigating a map and having to use their directions in English to communicate where
Sure.
their party wants to go. So we're looking at that as the concept, and I am at the point where I'm sort of ready to start running trials for those now,
Yeah,
hoping to get those going as like a summer school initially, to start with
yeah,
something for young people to do from all around the world, really, ideally, because that would be wonderful to be able to bring together a bunch of different
absolutely.
cultures under a common thread and kind of learn about each other, learn about different cultures, bring that into the imaginative space, and then improve some people's English as well at the same
For
time.
sure.
So, bit of a summer school for that is hopefully
Yeah,
the
yeah.
plan.
That's fantastic.
Awesome.
That's awesome. And we talked about you potentially starting a podcast, and eventually, is that something that is still on the radar? Is that in
I would love to.
development?
Yeah, yeah. I would like to do that. It would still kind of thinking about the what can be said that is useful and relevant, rather than just adding to noise. It would.
Sure.
I'd like to make something that's got a a bit of something different to it, or something specific that someone might kind of latch onto. But I would absolutely love
Yeah.
to kind of do something like that. And there are definitely plans in the pipeline, I think, to feature on a couple of people's shows and discuss more the D&D side of things, specifically like
Yeah.
structuring
Yeah.
campaigns and how I think at some point I'm going to be on another podcast there talking about how to structure games not from a module, how to go open world, how to go kind of homebrew, and how to kind of
Yeah.
maybe take an existing kind of location and just then create your own stories within that.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I'd definitely like to kind of talk more about the subject and
Yeah,
any other subjects, and would be nice to come back and chat with you some more about other things too.
absolutely, man. We'll have to do this again as time permits in the near
Yeah,
future
for
because I
sure.
always I always enjoy talking with you. I feel like every time we have a chance to talk, we could talk for hours about a myriad of subjects. And as we've talked about before, we have a lot of overlap in terms of kind of our life's path and our
Yeah, I think so.
stages of life that we're in. So I think I always enjoy talking to you because you have so much. I think you have a lot to share. So if you were ever to start a podcast, I think that you would have a lot of people that would enjoy listening to you. I know I'd enjoy
Oh,
listening to
thank you
what you
very
have to say,
much.
man.
It's very
Um,
nice of
I'm
you to
gonna
say.
I'm gonna conclude. Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna conclude the broadcast here. Stick around because you and I will go offline,
Okay.
kind of back into the studio. But I'm gonna end it here in a sec. Link, I appreciate you being here. Anybody who's watching this after the fact, if you're still here around at the very end, if you have not subscribed, well, please, if you could give us a consideration for subscribing, I'd appreciate it. We're going to be doing more things like this with talking to people like Adam who are involved in um, running games professionally, but who just have a lot of things they're interested in. And I think that we can do more of this and share more of this with you. So subscription is always appreciated. A like if you're already a subscriber always helps the YouTube algorithm. Um, and we will see you again soon. All
Thanks. Bye
right,
bye.
I'm out.